Part 3. There was a large clearing in the dense forest about 100 meters from the village. Although that clearing had been made by the villagers cutting down trees under the protection of the goblins in order to make logs, it still looked like the gaping maw of some gigantic beast. Ains and the others made their final checks, and then the young man who had hired them spoke up. "We'll be entering the forest after this, so I'll be counting on you to protect me." That said, the area just inside the forest is part of the wise king of the forest's sphere of control, so under normal circumstances, the chances of meeting other monsters are very low. The problem is that the ogres we met yesterday came from a place near the wise king of the forest's territory, so something must have happened in the woods. Although it's hardly something that I need to warn you gentlemen about, I hope everyone will remain on guard. Neferia's gaze rested briefly on Ains. The Swords of Darkness turned to look at Ains as well. "Well, with you around, we should be fine, Morn-san. If that monster called the Wise King of the Forest appears, let us hold it back. You should escape first." They could not help but gasp as they heard Ains's confident pronouncement. He seemed to shine even brighter in their eyes than after yesterday's battle with the ogres. Ains felt like something was wrong every time the people around him did that. This was a relic of rarely being praised in his past life. He envied the way Nabril could accept their awe so naturally with a smug look on her face. "If there's a need to run, could you please leave without delay? If the wise king of the forest is strong, I'll need to face it with my full power, and I don't want to get everyone caught up in it." "Understood. If that happens, we'll protect Neferia-san and flee the forest. But don't push yourself too hard either, Morn-san." "Thank you. I'll escape when it gets dangerous." "Then, Morn-san." Neferia seemed to be wavering between speech and silence. In the end, he made up his mind and said, "Could you not kill the wise king of the forest, but instead chase it away?" "Why is that?" Kugane village has not been attacked by monsters because the wise king of the forest's territory is nearby. If you defeat the wise king of the forest. "I see. That might be a bit much. Morn-san is strong, but his opponent is a legendary monster. Wouldn't he be in trouble if he couldn't defend himself with his full strength? How would he have the luxury of—" "I understand." "Wah!" Lucret exclaimed in shock. The other Swords of Darkness remained silent, but their surprise was written all over their faces. "It might be difficult, but I'll try to go easy on it and merely chase it away." Ains's reply, brimming with confidence, raised goosebumps on the skin of his fellow adventurers. "Even if your opponent is a legendary monster that's lived for centuries? Is this the sort of attitude that only the strong have?" Judging by Morn-san's personality, he probably isn't exaggerating or bluffing. In stark contrast to the Swords of Darkness, Neferia had an idea of Ains's power, and he had a relieved expression on his face. As he looked toward the young man, Ains laughed in his heart. Neferia hoped that monsters would not attack Kugane village. That being the case, all Ains need to do was to have other monsters replace the wise king of the forest in enforcing its area of influence. That way he could still fulfill Neferia's wish. Even if he ended up killing the wise king of the forest, all he had to do was dispatch vassals from Nazarick to replace him. "All right. Now, let's move on. The herbs I'm looking for this time look like this. If anyone finds them, let me know." Neferia produced a sample of a withered plant from a herb-gathering pouch on his belly. "Oh, it's Kugane grass." To Ains, it looked like the nearby weeds. However, Dine the druid was different, and he immediately named the plant. Lucret and Ninya nodded in response to hearing the name. They probably had some herbal knowledge themselves, and the name jogged their memories. Just as he was hesitating over whether to pretend that he knew, everyone looked at Ains. "Morn-san, are you alright?" That plant. I've heard of it." Ains calmly nodded in agreement. If he were not undead, his voice might have become high-pitched from panic, but his helmet prevented others from seeing his expression, which also concealed his feelings. Ains was sheathed in heavy armor and cut an imposing figure, but his heart was closer to that of a bunny. "Yes, this herb is commonly used when making potions. So it's commonly found near adventurers." "Indeed it is. Now I see why we came to this place. I've heard that wild herbs are more potent than cultivated ones, no?" "That's right. Incidentally, the fact that we use all natural ingredients in our potions is a point of pride for us. Well, they're only about 10% more effective than those of the competition. That 10% can be crucial to people who frequently put their lives on the line. To think you sell better potions for the same price." As expected of the Beria Apothecary, which built its reputation on selling high-quality potions. As he heard Nefiria and the Swords of Darkness discussing potions, Ains fell into deep thought. In YGGDRASIL, healing potions were usually made through skills that were only available through certain job classes, or by casting the desired spells on the appropriate ingredients. Although Ains knew a little about this field, all he knew was that the ingredients were made by compounding specific substances with an alchemical solvent, but never through the use of herbs. In other words, potions in this world were made in a different way from YGGDRASIL. This must have been what Nefiria meant by "could not be made by normal methods." Ains was convinced that mastering the potion-making techniques of this world would strengthen Nazarick. The question now was how to master them. As he was thinking, the conversation seemed to have turned to the job once more, and Ains turned to listen. "There's a clearing in the forest, which I've designated as our destination. I've already told you about that place, Lucrat-san, so please guide us there." After hearing Lucrat's casual, "Leave it to me," Nefiria turned back to the others. "Then, let's begin the herb collection. I have a suggestion, actually. Please tell us, Morn-san. Since Nabe can cast something like the alarm spell we use when pitching camp, could we temporarily split off when we reach the destination?" Everyone, Nefiria included, wrinkled their brows. This was because they were uneasy about their strongest fighting force leaving them in such a dangerous area. However, Nefiria quickly replied, "That's fine. However, please don't go for too long. Of course. In order to avoid getting lost, I'll tie a rope to myself. Tug on it if there's anything. Then, could I go too? I need to watch carefully in case you and Nabe-chan do something weird in the bushes." Inferior life form, cockroach. Is lust the only thing left in your head? If I castrated you, would you still be able to move? That's enough, Nabe. Lucrat-san, there's no need to go that far. Although, I'd like to ask Ninja-san if there's a spell which can tell you where members of your group are when you're scattered in the forest. It would be convenient if such a magic existed. I've never heard of such a spell. It would be very handy if it existed. Ains nodded as he heard Ninja's denial. There's a 6th tier spell, which can detect the location of specific objects. Do they lack knowledge in that field, or is it that there are spells which are unique to YGGDRASIL just as there are spells which are unique to this world? Ains put these thoughts aside for a moment and raised his chin to signal Nabril, indicating that she should get ready. Having received her orders, Nabril immediately began sizing up the Swords of Darkness. Then, Morn-san and Nabe-san will leave us for a while, and we'll pick the herbs after they return. Since it was their employer's decision, nobody else could object. The Swords of Darkness nodded one by one. After the discussion and other matters were concluded, Neferia called for them to move out. The group shouldered their baggage and entered the forest. There were trees felled by the villagers nearby. The earth was already dried out. It looked like an easily walkable stretch of forest, but the scenery before their eyes slowly transformed into something like a green labyrinth. There were no landmarks in the forest, and it was impossible to tell in which direction one was moving. A sense of unease filled everyone, as though they had been swallowed up. The sky-scraping trees further intensified that uneasiness, and most people would have been frightened by this scene. However, Ains had an undead mind and felt no fear, apart from the vestiges of his human mind. He calmly praised the magnificent natural vista before him. In Yggdrasil's forest and other natural zones, he considered these things to be simple in-game scenery. Even now, he still thought the same way. Ains, who was proud of the design of the Great Tomb of Nazarick, was filled with complex emotions. He had not expected that natural forest could be so awe-inspiring. I see why Blue Planet Sun liked nature so much. He looked around as he surveyed the forest, but it was peaceful, and he saw no traces of any animals. Aside from the distant sound of birdsong, there was no sign of life here at all. At the same time, he observed Luca the ranger advancing carefully, keeping a lookout with all his 5 senses. He seemed to have concluded that there was no living creature hiding nearby. Actually, there's someone hiding behind us. Ains was proud of the person sneaking behind him. The group, save for 2 people, was filled with tension as they walked silently through the forest, where the sun's light could not penetrate and which was surprisingly cool. They sweated heavily because the terrain was difficult and they were under no small amount of mental stress. Finally, they reached a clearing that was roughly 50 meters across. "We've arrived at our destination. We'll spread out from here and pick herbs." Everyone began setting their gear down after they heard Neferia unburdening himself of his baggage. However, they did not relax. Instead, they carefully observed their surroundings, ready to deal with any sudden developments. This was because they were no longer in the world of men. "Then, we'll move as we planned earlier." After Neferia replied to that statement in the affirmative, Ains tied a rope to a nearby tree, then picked the other end up and headed into the forest. The rope he was holding was not thick, but it was very strong. It would not snap just by being dragged along the ground. While holding the rope, Ains and Nabril could move in a straight line into the forest. Normally speaking, it was almost impossible to move in a straight line, since then trees would get in one's way. However, the rope they were holding showed the path, and so the 2 of them could proceed despite their inexperience with the forest. They moved about 50 meters into the forest, stopping when the rope had almost run out. Trees and vegetation blocked the way behind them, so they did not worry about being spotted. There was someone nearby who could immediately deal with anybody who was following them, so there was no need to fret about that either. "Here should be fine." "Yes. Then, let's discuss how to improve my reputation here. May I ask how you plan to do that? Does it involve finding a lot of the herbs they want?" Ains looked quietly at Nabril, and then shook his head. "I plan to fight the wise king of the forest." Nabril seemed to have a question mark over her head, so Ains explained further. "My aim is to impress my might upon him in an easily understandable way. Was the battle with the ogres not enough to convince them of your power?" "You're not wrong to say that, but goblins and ogres are not enough. When they discuss my accomplishments back in town, there's a world of difference between saying I slew an ogre in one blow and saying I defeated the wise king of the forest. One of them will spread much faster and further than the other. This is why I need to put on a good show." "I see. As I thought, your plans take everything into consideration, Ains-sama. Still, how will we find that wise king of the forest? I've already planned for that. Just as Nabril was about to ask, a third speaker cut in. Yup, that's why I'm here. Nabril jerked her head over toward the source of the sudden voice. She even thrust her right hand out, preparing to aim and cast a spell. However, her face changed immediately upon seeing who the speaker was. Aura-sama, please don't scare me like that. Sorry. A dark elf girl popped out from behind a nearby tree, with a beaming smile that seemed to say "He" on her face. She was one of the twin guardians of the 6th floor of the Great Tomb of Nazarick, Aura Bella Fiora. May I ask when you arrived? I've been following behind you and Ains-sama ever since you entered the forest. Aura was a beast tamer cum ranger, so tracking people in the forest was child's play to her. While it was true that Lucret was also a ranger, the difference in their abilities was so great that there was no way he could have spotted her. So, my job here is to find the monster called the Wise King of the Forest, then urge it to attack Ains-sama. That's right. According to our previous intelligence, the Wise King of the Forest is a four-legged beast with silver fur and a snake-like tail. Does that remind you of anything? It's fine. It should be that guy, Aura replied as she glanced upward. If that's the case, do you want me to tame it directly? That is also an alternative, but let's not. Aura the beast tamer should be able to easily subdue the Wise King of the Forest. However, it would be troublesome if someone found out that Ains had been pulling all the strings. Therefore, it would be wiser to avoid having to worry about such things. By the way, Aura, how's the progress on that matter I asked you to handle? Yes. Aura swiftly genuflected before Ains, in the manner of a vassal to her liege. It did not quite seem like Aura's style, but Ains responded in kind, listening to her report in his capacity as her master. The order you gave me to investigate and control the interior of the forest, verify if there are any life forms willing to obey Nazarick, and set up a resource storehouse, is going well, Ains-sama. Is that so? Ains replied simply. Before heading to Erantal, Ains had handed down different orders to each guardian. The reason he ordered Aura and Mare to scout the Great Forest was in order to ensure the safety of Nazarick and collect information. As for the resource storehouse, it might be better to describe it as more of a shelter. The reason he ordered her to build it there was to provide a hiding place in case there was an emergency and he could not return to Nazarick. In addition, it would be best to have an alternate base of operations to avoid Nazarick's location being revealed. And of course, it could be used to store all manner of supplies and resources. He had ordered her to find creatures which would obey Nazarick because he wanted to see if he could power level them. In addition, he wanted to learn about how one went about garring levels in this world. Because of this string of tasks, Aura, Mare, the vassals designated for construction, and other powerful entities had invaded the forest and disrupted the balance of power within it. This was why the ogres and other monsters had chosen to flee, even at the risk of treading within the domain of the Wise King of the Forest. Still, the construction of the storehouse will take a long time to complete. That can't be helped. After all, it has only been a short while since I gave you that order. While Aura had access to golems and undead from Nazarick, which could labor forever without needing to sleep or eat, this was not a task which could be easily finished, considering the amount of work that need to be done. It's alright if it takes extra time. Try your best to make it perfect. Make ample preparations for defense, so we won't fall short if we're attacked. Yes. Understood. Very well. Then, Aura, I'll leave the matter of the Wise King of the Forest to you. Yes. Aura replied energetically as she stood back up. After Ains bade Aura farewell, a gigantic black wolf with a lustrous black pelt padded out from behind one of the trees, as though it had been waiting for that moment. Its fiery red eyes blazed with intelligence, proving that it was no mere beast. That was not all. On the branches of another tree was a six-legged monster which looked like a fusion of a chameleon and an iguana. Its scaly skin ran through a kaleidoscopic array of lightning-fast color changes. It was as large as the wolf from earlier. "Fen, Quadriceal, what's with you? Worried about me?" The massive wolf called Fen whined and nuzzled Aura. Quadriceal stuck out its tongue and lightly licked at the top of Aura's head. Hey, we still have to do the work Ains-sama gave us." Aura's fighting strength was second from the bottom among the Guardians of Nazarick, and the fact was that some of the area Guardians were stronger than her. However, that only took into consideration their solo abilities. Aura's forte did not lie in fighting as a lone unit, but as part of a group. Of the hundreds of monsters which Aura could summon, the highest level among them was 80. With the aid of Aura skills, they could reach level 90 or so. With these beasts at her command, her combat abilities far surpassed those of any other Guardian. The two monsters here were two of Aura's favorite high-level magical beasts, the divine beast Fenrir, also known as Fen, and the equally powerful Itzamna, Quadriceal. As they heard Aura's words, Fen and Quadriceal stopped playing around. "All right, let's go." Aura led the two magical beasts in a sprint through the forest. Even though they were surrounded by dense woodland, they were not imped in the slightest, moving as fast as the wind. After about 30 minutes of running, Aura reached her destination. Aura smiled. It was a cold smile which did not fit her youthful face. It was equal parts innocent and cruel. "I kind of wanted it for myself, but Ains-sama did give me an order, so it can't be helped." She did not sound like she was talking to her pets, but rather, like she was muttering to her jewelry. Aura knew where the wise king of the forest made its lair because she had long wanted to subdue it for her own. The wise king of the forest was much weaker than Aura's own monsters, so it had no value to her. However, it was an unfamiliar creature to Aura, and that inflamed her collector's desire. It was a shame to have to let it go, but if she was giving it up to her master, the supreme being to whom she owed all loyalty, then she had no complaints. Now then, Aura began transmuting the air molecules in her lungs. The newly recombined breath was not a natural substance, and it leaked from between her pink lips. This breath of hers could control emotions. Normally, her breath only filled a very small radius around her, so it was more like a special type of passive skill. However, if she wanted, she could combine this technique with other targeting skills to hit in any target within 2 kilometers with perfect accuracy, even in a forest like this. However, there was no need for that. Because her objective was to remove any signs of her passing, she snuck up on her target. Not even her magical beasts, let alone the natural animals of the forest, could detect Aura as she was now. Aura proudly walked up to the wise king of the forest, all traces of her presence thoroughly erased, and breathed lightly. Her breath contained elements which induced terror, startling awake the sleeping wise king of the forest. Every hair on the wise king of the forest stood on end, and it fled immediately. The speed of a terrified four-legged beast was startling. Yet Aura, who was chasing it from behind, was faster still. Aura shadowed the wise king of the forest, harrying it towards Ains, like she was a guided spectre of death. "Still, I wonder if I could take its pelt if it dies." There was a disturbance in the forest. Nukra pricked up his ears as he sensed the change in the air. He surveyed his surroundings with a grim expression on his face and wariness in his heart. "Something's coming." When they heard this, the Swords of Darkness stopped their herb gathering and drew their weapons in preparation for battle. Shortly after, Ains tightened his grip on his great swords as well. "Is it the wise king of the forest?" Nobody answered Neferia's uneasy question as he stuffed the herbs into his bags. Everyone merely watched the depths of the forest in silence. "This is bad." Even the usually flighty Lucret was speaking in a serious tone. "Something massive is coming. I don't know why it's moving in a serpentine pattern, but from the sound of trampled grass, it should be here soon. However, can't be sure if it's the wise king of the forest. Let's fall back. It doesn't matter if it's the wise king of the forest or not. Staying here is very dangerous. Even if it's not the wise king of the forest, we've entered its territory, so the chances of it giving chase are very high." As he said this, Peter looked to Ains. "Morn-san, can we trouble you to be the rear guard?" "No problem. Leave it to me. We'll take care of the rest." The Swords of Darkness called out their encouragement to Ains one after the other as they helped Neferia retreat from the forest. "Morn-san, please don't overdo it." Neferia's voice carried an absolute faith in Ains, and his eyes glittered with admiration underneath his hair. It made Ains feel deeply uncomfortable, and he wished that they would leave quickly. As he watched them disappear into the forest on the other side of the clearing, a twinge of unease ran through Ains. He was not sure if he could leave the forest by himself, but then he immediately considered that he could let Aura guide him. There was a more pressing problem before him at the moment. Damn. They might think it's not the wise king of the forest. And even if I bring it back to Nazarick, I need some proof of having beaten it. Should I cut off one of its legs? Ains-sama. Nabral's gaze was far afield, looking at the mighty shadow that emerged from the distant trees. There was no way to make its shape out because it was hiding behind the trees, and without the sun to light it, there was no way to tell if its body was, in fact, silver. Has our guest arrived? Or maybe were the guests? Ains idly mused as he stepped up in front of Nabral. He had no idea of how strong it was, what level it was, so Ains made the logical decision of putting himself in front of the magic caster Nabral, who was not suited to melee combat. Once he got in front of Nabral, Ains felt the air move. He immediately crossed his great swords in front of him like a shield. He heard something like the sound of steel meeting steel, and a tremendous force bore down on Ains's arms. A weighty and swift object had struck the great swords Ains was holding. He saw a long, serpentine tail slowly retreat behind a tree. Its tail attacks like a bullwhip. However, judging by the feel and sound of the impact, that tail must be as hard as metal. Its attack radius of over 20 meters will be hard to deal with, but how does it live with a tail like that? With no frontliner skills, Ains had no idea how to deal with it. All he could do was advance into melee with his foe. Ains sighed. Of course, this was just going through the motions, since Ains had no lungs. He braced his shoulders into a battle stance, ready to counterattack. In response to this, a serene bass voice boomed out from the forest. "How spectacular! To think thou could endure the blow of this one. Perhaps this is the first time this one hath encountered a foe possessed of such prowess. Thou, this one." Ains's illusory face hardened, and then he considered that those words had already been translated. Ains decided that this was the closest equivalent to what had actually been said. Then, "O trespasser upon mine domain, shouldst thou decide to quit the field, this one shall not pursue thee, in honor of thine magnificent defense." What say thee? What a foolish question. Of course I plan to defeat you for my own gain. Speaking of which, are you so insecure about your appearance that you have to hide in the shadows? Or are you shy by nature? What a wild tongue thou hast, O trespasser! Now behold this one's mighty form. Stare with eyes wide and tongue-tied, and tremble in dread and awe. The wise king of the forest slowly emerged from the trees, revealing its body to him. As he saw it, Ains's illusionary eyes went wide. "Phew, this one senses thy fear and alarm from beneath thine helmet." A smile twisted the face of the magical beast, and it curled its long tail. There were strange glyphs and symbols on the silvery fur covering its body. It was about the size of a horse, but it was low to the ground, being larger in the horizontal rather than the vertical dimension. The wise king of the forest shrank the distance between them. "What is this?" An indescribable feeling washed over Ains. After becoming undead, all the strong emotions he felt were immediately suppressed. With that in mind, this was probably not a very strong emotion. Even so, he had not felt this in a long time, including his time in YGGDRASIL, the sensation when a monster appeared before him. "I have a question. What is the name of your species?" "This one is known in thy tongue as the wise king of the forest. Apart from that, this one holds no other titles." Ains gulped, and then asked further, "Your species, might they be called Jungarian hamsters?" The wise king of the forest. From what Ains could see, it closely resembled a Jungarian hamster. Its fur was silvery, or rather, snow-white, contrasted by its black, round eyes, and its body looked like a gigantic bun. Of course, hamsters did not have such long tails, nor did they grow larger than a human being. However, those two factors aside, he honestly could not think of any other animal which could compare. Fully 100 out of 100 people would agree that it was a hamster. Well, a giant Jungarian hamster. Maybe a mutant Jungarian hamster, or something like that. It tilted its adorable head. It did not seem to have a neck, and the wise king of the forest sniffed at the air before speaking again. This one hath lived in solitude all mine life. This one canst not answer thee, for this one knowst not of this one's. Or dost thou imply that thou knowst of this one's species? I guess, sort of. One of my former friends once kept a creature which was similar to you." Ains recalled that friend of his, and how that friend had not logged on to YGGDRASIL for about a week because that friend's pet Jungarian hamster had died. Behind him, Nabarul quietly went, "Oh, probably because she had learned something about one of the 41 supreme beings." What? To think beings like this one would be raised as pets. The wise king of the forest puffed up its cheeks. Ains had no idea whether it was unhappy or trying to intimidate him, or something else. The only thing Ains could be sure of was that it was definitely not eating. This one praised the enlighten me on that matter. This one is a living being and must procreate. If others of this one's breed exist, then this one must go forth and multiply, lest this one become a failure as a living being. According to the wise king of the forest's logic, Ains, who could not reproduce, was unfit to be a living being. As he clung to the excuse that he was undead and not, in fact, a living creature, Ains weakly answered, It wasn't as big as you, anyway. Be that as it may. Perchance, it was a juvenile. No, even fully grown, it was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand." With a vague sense of sadness, the wise king of the forest's whiskers drooped down. "Indeed, that is quite a stretch. This one must pass the years in solitude. After all, if you were a more impressive-looking species it wouldn't be so bad. But you're a hamster. I do sympathize with your circumstances, but if there were others like you, your numbers would increase without an end and the world might end up being destroyed." The wise king of the forest twitched its whiskers. While its eyes were the same shiny black as always, there seemed to be some anger in its tone. "What an outrage! Increasing the numbers of one's species is important. And this one hath lived without companionship all mine life. 'Tis only natural to desire others of mine kind." "Oh, well, that's certainly true. Forgive me, I misspoke." Ains recalled his comrades from Ainsulgaon and apologized. Although he felt terribly mixed up about remembering his friends after being lectured by a hamster and then apologizing to it. Think naught of it. This one grants thee mine forgiveness. Then, let us abandon this idle banter and show each other our fatal resolve. Listen well, O trespasser who hath profaned mine domain, offer thy life as this one's sustenance. Ains felt his motivation drain away. Even if that cute appearance was just a facade, he still could not bring himself to fight it in earnest. No matter how you looked at it, having the ruler of the great tomb of Nazarick duel a giant hamster was just sad. Even if he defeated it, he would have to take the corpse of a Jungarian hamster and tell people, "This is the wise king of the forest. The fight was too intense and I couldn't chase it away." Quote, how would adventurers including the Swords of Darkness view that? Even in the best-case scenario, they would simply look silently at Ains with pitying eyes. In that case, he would not defeat the wise king of the forest, but capture it alive to pick its brains. "Nabe, fall back," Ains said, forcing some semblance of fighting spirit back into himself as he gave that order. Nabril had a look of absolute confidence in Ains's victory on her face as she bowed deeply and then retreated to a corner of the clearing. "Oh, but know thou that being outnumbered is no handicap for this one. I can't do something as embarrassing as fighting a hamster 2-on-1. After hearing those words and seeing Ains raise his weapons in a fighting stance, the wise king of the forest lowered its body and tensed its entire body. "Regret not thy decision. Now bear the charge of this one." The massive body forcefully kicked off the earth with a mighty bang, and lunged at Ains. The flying tackle of the wise king of the forest's massive body would have tossed any ordinary person away, had they been hit by it without using a martial art. However, Ains used the blades of his great swords as a shield, and took the wise king of the forest's charge head-on. Despite its fearsome destructive power, Ains still easily resisted it. Moo. The wise king of the forest was surprised by the unmoving Ains, and slashed with the surprisingly sharp claws on its forepaws. Ains raised the greatsword in his left hand to block the strike, and swung with the greatsword in his right. He did not put his full strength into it, but it was still quite a forceful blow. There was a loud crash, and Ains's strike was deflected away, his arm numbed from the impact. It would seem the wise king of the forest had blocked Ains's strike with its claws, and the two attacks had bounced apart after an intense mid-air clash. Well done. But how about this? Charm species. Mind-affecting effects were useless against the undead. Ignoring his opponent's magical attack, Ains swung both his great swords. There was a sound of clashing metal again, and Ains's swords were deflected once more. Ains narrowed his eyes under his helmet. While that had only been a probing attack, the wise king of the forest had deflected that strike with its skin. It would seem that its hide was harder than most metals. Was it not soft and fluffy fur? It was quite surprising, but Ains chased away these thoughts which had no place in a battle. Ains's physical attack power would be around that of a level 30 warrior in YGGDRASIL terms. However, that was greatly affected by spells and equipment, so he could not be sure. Still, with that as a baseline, the wise king of the forest had the fighting power of a level 30 or so character. A frown grew on the illusory face under Ains's helmet. Not bad. Very suitable for melee combat trying. Ains was certain that as long as he went all out, he could definitely defeat this opponent. Although he had to stay alert, it was still good practice for being a frontliner. Ains continued swinging his twin great swords, and the wise king of the forest continued its adroit deflection of his blows. Then another glyph on its body lit up, and it cast a spell. Blindness. Unlike the previous charm species, this non-mind-affecting spell of blindness could potentially have affected Ains. However, Ains had a racial skill which rendered him immune to low-tier magic. Therefore, the spell vanished without ever taking effect. A different symbol lit up when it used that spell. It seems the symbols on its body represent the spells it can use. There were spellcasting monsters in YGGDRASIL. While the numbers of spells they could use varied greatly according to their level and species, as a rough guideline, they could use about 8 kinds of magic. Similarly, the wise king of the forest had roughly 8 kinds of tattoos on its body, so Ains felt like he was fighting a monster from YGGDRASIL. The wise king of the forest did not notice its spell had been resisted, and attacked with its forepaws. Ains blocked with the greatsword in one hand and countered with the greatsword in his other. He thought of past battles alongside his friends. Touch Me, who wielded a sword and shield and was one of the greatest warriors in YGGDRASIL. Nishikienrei, who bore the twin kodachis named Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi, and boasted the highest attack power in the guild. The man also known as No Second Strike, although that was not actually the case, wielding the twin nodachis known as God-slaying/Emperor and Takumi Kazuchi MK8, warrior Takumi Kazuchi. And then he recalled the brave man he had encountered recently, Gazef Stronov, the kingdom's warrior captain. Perhaps Ains had traveled to Irantul in the guise of a warrior because he had been moved by that man. Ains mocked himself for thinking of these things now. I can't let my mind wander in combat. Although there's certainly enough leeway for it, I can't be careless. Even if my opponent is a hamster. He imagined the countless sword strokes his companions had made, and Ains attacked continuously, trying his best to reproduce those moves. At the same time, he used the greatsword in his left hand to intercept the wise king of the forest's counterattacks. Both sides went back and forth, neither side being able to strike a decisive blow, until Ains's greatsword finally breached the wise king of the forest's defense. What? The scent of fresh blood followed the sensation of the greatsword piercing into flesh. The greatsword in his right hand grazed the hide of the wise king of the forest, sending hairs flying. He planned to continue his assault with his left-hand greatsword, but the wise king of the forest sensed it was at a disadvantage and leapt away, landing about 10 meters away from Ains. I've heard hamsters escape their nests by jumping, but I've never seen one retreat before. Just as Ains began losing himself in thought after battling the giant hamster, the wise king of the forest lowered its body. Ains watched his opponent's movements in surprise. What does it plan to do at that range? If it's a charge like just now, then I'll just hold my sword out to let it kill itself. But it's most likely that it's going to use another spell. The wise king of the forest curled its tail up behind it, but judging by its length, it probably shouldn't be able to reach. No, that's not it. Ains realized that he had miscalculated. The tail strike at the beginning had come from a long distance away. In other words, he was still in range of the tail attack. As expected, the tail swung in a huge, sweeping arc, speeding at Ains with its surprising length. Ains blocked it with his right-hand greatsword, and his eyes went wide with surprise. WooshOurWorldAudio.com. This was because the tail had turned at a right angle, using the greatsword as a fulcrum of sorts. He swung his greatsword to the side, aiming to cast away the tail which was on his sword. However, he was a moment too late, and the tail scraped the backplate of his armor, sending an impact through his body. Due to a racial skill, an attack like this would not have hurt Ains even if the tail had struck him dead on. However, if one thought of this as a first-person shooter game, then he had made a great mistake. Now, we are 1 for 1. A mere hamster anger rose inside him. Then, let me try a ranged attack of my own. Having decided this, Ains firmly gripped his right-hand greatsword. As Ains was preparing his attack, the wise king of the forest spoke, with heartfelt respect. That armor. 'Tis truly amazing. Nay, thy strength and swordplay are both breathtaking to behold. Thou art truly a superlative warrior. Art thou a man of fame in human society? The strength faded from his right hand. In a somewhat disappointed tone, he asked, Do I look like a warrior to you? Why dost thou ask? What wouldst thou resemble, save a warrior? Mayhaps thou might be better addressed as a knight. The wise king of the forest. Well, you've been misnamed. Or rather, everything started going wrong once I discovered you were a giant hamster. Indeed, it was hard to think of Ains as a magic caster in this suit of full plate armor. Still, he had hoped that something with the grand title of Wise King of the Forest would at least have noticed something amiss, or showed some sign that it could see through his disguise. The Wise King of the Forest must have thought that Ains's magic immunity was simply resisting the spell through sheer force of will. Granted, special defenses like resistance and immunity were practically the same thing in YGGDRASIL, but at least it should have tried to act like a proper sage. In the end, it was completely undeserving of the title of Wise King. Quote, maybe if it had been called a giant Jungarian hamster, he would not have held such high hopes. Whoever called him a Wise King must have had something wrong with him. It was a mislabeling, false advertising. Having lost the will to fight, Ains powerlessly lowered the great swords in his hands. What art thou doing? Could it possibly be? Dost thou intend to yield before the battle is decided? Come at this one with all thy strength. This is a duel to the death. The words from the angry wise king of the forest chipped away at Ains's heart. Fortunately, great emotional upheavals were suppressed immediately, so he still had some strength remembering. That's enough. Speaking with a cold, crystal-clear voice, Ains pointed his right-hand greatsword at the wise king of the forest and activated his skill. Despair Aura V. Since its instant death effect was too strong, he decided to reduce its potency and instead activated Despair Aura I's Fear effect. A cold, soul-chilling vapor gusted out from Ains. The moment that mass of cold air washed over the wise king of the forest, every single one of its hairs stood on end, and it rolled over with surprising speed. All he could see was its silvery fur, and its soft, defenseless belly. Craven. This one yields to thee. Ah. In the end it was just a beast. As he muttered tiredly in response, Ains walked over to the wise king of the forest, observing its vulnerable belly, and then considered what he should do next. It's a creature of this world, so chasing it away would be a shame. Sadly, it's just a hamster, so should I raise it as a pet? At the very least, I should make use of its corpse. One of Ains's job classes was called Necromancer. It was a class that allowed one to turn a corpse into an undead slave, though the quality of the undead produced depended on the species of the corpse. The best corpses were those of powerful beings like dragons, while human corpses could become zombies and skeletons. Then, given that the wise king of the forest did not exist in YGGDRASIL, what sort of undead would its corpse make? A wise king of the forest zombie. Shall we kill it? A cheery voice rang out. Ains turned, and found that Aura had mysteriously appeared beside Nabril. If you kill it, I'd like its hide. It looks like it would make a great pelt. Ains lowered his head and looked straight at the wise king of the forest, who was looking at him with moist, tear-filled eyes. Its whiskers twitched as it waited fearfully for its future to be decided. Just then, he suddenly recalled the words which he had exchanged with the wise king of the forest. Ains recalled the part about friends. Ains found that he was hesitating. Then, with a sigh, he made his decision. My true name is Ains Ulgaun. If you are willing to serve me, I will spare your life. Thank you very much. This one shall offer absolute fealty to thee for the gift of this one's life. The life of the wise king of the forest shall be an offering to the great warrior, Ains Ulgaun Sama. Aura looked at the wise king of the forest, who had jumped up and was frantically pledging its loyalty. There seemed to be something like regret in Aura's eyes. Once they left the forest, they encountered the others, who rejoiced that Ains and Nabril were both unharmed. Only Lucret seemed to have his doubts. In a tone that combined surprise and praise, Nefiria asked Ains, "You're unhurt? Did you avoid fighting?" Just as Ains was about to answer, Lucret cut in. "Morn-san, what did you bring back? Were you charmed by something?" "I battled the wise king of the forest, and tamed it." "Oi, come out." They could all see the pearly white fur of the wise king of the forest as it emerged from the trees. The swords of darkness gathered around Nefiria, shocked expressions on their faces as they all took a step back with weapons raised. "Well, it's huge, even if it's a Jungarian hamster. Though it had cute round eyes, its massive body was still a fearsome sight, and it was only natural that these adventurers should be wary on behalf of the client they were escorting." With that in mind, Ains decided to calmly say, "Be at ease, everyone. I have subdued it, so it will not lash out wildly and hurt people." Then, he approached the wise king of the forest, and made a show of patting its furry body. "It is as my lord says. This wise king of the forest is loyal to my lord, and is my lord's faithful servant. This one swears to my lord that this one will not inconvenience thee, fine gentleman." In this way, the wise king of the forest displayed its loyalty to Ains. Perhaps they were on guard because of its vast size, but since it was a cute Jungarian hamster to begin with, they would probably stop being on edge once they got used to it. The problem was how to make everyone think it was the true wise king of the forest. That was the only thing Ains had no idea how to accomplish. And then, things developed in a completely unexpected direction. "So this is the wise king of the forest. Unbelievable. What a majestic beast. What?" Ains looked back and forth between Ninya and the wise king of the forest, checking to see if Ninya was making fun of him, but Ninya seemed to be entirely serious. "Wow, the wise king of the forest. So the legends really were true. I can feel its mighty presence just standing before it." Dine gasped. "A mighty presence? That's pretty awesome. You actually pulled it off? Someone as strong as you is certainly qualified to have Nabe-chan at his side. If we had encountered him, we would have been killed for sure. I expected nothing less of you, Morn-san. Amazing work." As Lucret, Peter, and the others showered him in praise, Ains looked to the wise king of the forest again. A giant Jungarian hamster. It did not remind him of anything else. Why were they so intimidated by a beast like this? "Everyone, do you not think this creature's eyes are very cute?" Their eyes went wide as they heard those words, as though their eyeballs were about to fall out. It would seem that statement was quite absurd. "Momon-san, do you think this beast's eyes are cute?" "Of course." After mocking the reply in his heart, Ains magnanimously nodded, and then he began to wonder if the wise king of the forest had used a passive charm skill. "Unbelievable, that's Morn-san for you. Ninya, you looked into its eyes, what do you think?" "They are eyes filled with wisdom, and I could feel the power of this beast. There's no way it could be cute by any stretch of the word." Ains looked dumbfoundedly at the others. After realizing that they shared Ninya's opinion, Ains felt his head spin for a moment. "How about you, Nabe? Actual strength aside, those are powerful-looking eyes. No way. Seriously. They were all gushing praise with sparkly eyes. In other words, they were in awe of Ains for being able to nonchalantly call the eyes of such a beast cute. Ains kept glancing back at the wise king of the forest, but there was no way he could see anything approaching wisdom in him. Could it be that my aesthetic sense changed as well after becoming undead? Since nobody apart from himself felt that way, it was quite likely that such a change had taken place. However, it was probably best to make absolutely sure. By the way, does everyone think rats are strong? Rats. Giant rats. Monsters like that aren't anything special. You can find them in the sewers of Erantal. Giant rats carry nasty diseases. Werets too. Since werets can resist damage made from everything except silver weapons, would they qualify as strong? Don't hamsters look like rats? And the wise king of the forest has a very long tail. It's more like a rat than a hamster. A puzzled Ains came to a conclusion. In other words, this world is weird. Just as Ains was agonizing over trivial matters like the differences between this world and the previous one, Nefiria asked in a worried tone of voice. But if you take this monster away, and thus its sphere of influence, won't the other monsters attack Kugane village because it's not there to scare it off anymore? Ains raised his chin to indicate the wise king of the forest. It got the message, and said, "By village you mean? Well, the balance of power in the forest is now in chaos. Even if this one was there, this one would not be able to guarantee their safety by any means." No way. Ains did not comfort the shocked Nefiria. He merely smiled inside. The wise king of the forest is hardly a fitting name. Let's see what I can get out of this. Just as Ains was thinking about how to guide the conversation, he could feel Nefiria looking at him. He seemed to be wavering between speaking and keeping quiet, and his mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. Ains understood the turmoil in Nefiria's heart. On one hand, he must have wanted Ains to save the village once more. On the other, Nefiria probably felt that it was too troublesome, and did not want to leave everything to him. As the Swords of Darkness discussed how to save the village, Nefiria made up his mind and addressed Ains with a serious look on his face. "Morn-san." "Yes?" A secretly delighted Ains waited for what Nefiria would say next. The truth was that Ains had always intended to protect Kugane village, which was highly valuable as a source of information. However, the important thing was whether he could profit from it. Since he could frame the thing as doing a favor for Nefiria and thus make Nefiria indebted to him, it was like killing two birds with one stone. This was Ains's plan in order to make up for the miscalculation with the wise king of the forest. However, Nefiria's words vastly exceed Ains's expectations. "Morn-san, please let me join your team." I want to protect Kugane village, but I don't have the strength to do it now. So I want to become stronger. I want to learn the secret to your strength, Morn-san. I don't mind if it's just a little bit. However, I can't hire an excellent adventurer like you on a long-term basis with the amount of money I have. So please, let me join your party. I have some confidence in my ability as a herbalist, but I'm willing to carry luggage and do other menial labor. Please allow me to do this, I beg you." Just as Ains was blinking his non-existent eyelids, Nefiria continued. "I've always been researching herbological knowledge. I didn't give that decision much thought because my grandmother and father were both herbalists. But now I found the path I want to walk, and it's not as a herbalist." "So, you want to become a great magic caster and protect Kugane village, then?" "Yes." Nefiria seemed to have shared his youthful attitude, and looked straight at Ains, his eyes filled with a manly resolve. In YGGDRASIL, there had been an endless stream of applicants seeking to join the guild Ainsul Gown. Most of them wanted to do so for personal gain, thinking that they would profit from joining one of the highest-ranked guilds in the game. They did not think of what they could do for the guild, but what the guild could do for them. In addition, there were those who wanted to infiltrate the guild to steal its information and rare items. Because of this, Kugane did not increase its numbers much beyond its founding members. They were careful not to let their hard work and effort be trampled by others. Still, this was the simple, pure desire of a man who knew nothing of the guild called Kugane. His misguided way of thinking was quite refreshing. Ha, ha. Ains laughed, long and loud. His laughter was light and buoyant. Then, when he was done, he removed his helmet and bowed deeply. He could hear Nabrul taking a deep breath in the background. Actions like this did not fit Nabrul's master, the supreme ruler of the Great Tomb of Nazarick. Still, Ains felt that he had to do this without any hesitation about whether it was right or proper. He did not feel that bowing to a young man who was only half his age was shameful. There was no malice in Ains's laughter, but Ains now knew he should not have done so. He raised his head to face the surprised Nefiria. "Forgive me for my laughter. That was a mistake on my part. But I would like you to understand that I was not laughing at your determination. In order to join my team, you must meet 2 criteria. At the moment, you have only met one of them. Therefore, I am sorry, but I cannot let you join." The hidden condition was that more than half of the present guild members had to approve of the prospective member. Therefore, even if Ains agreed, he could not add members to the guild on his own. However, Ains was pleased by the loyalty which the Guardians of Nazarick had shown him after coming to this world, and in that good mood, he continued. "I understand how you feel, and I will remember that you wish to join my team. As for protecting this village, I will exert all my power to aid you. However, I might need your help." "Yes, please, I'm eager to help." "Is that so? Is that so?" As Ains was nodding, he met Ninya's gaze. He seemed to be enjoying the show, which made Ains feel a little embarrassed. Then, we'll discuss that matter later. Before that, I have an interesting story to tell everyone about the taming of the wise king of the forest. End chapter.